Speaking to the Dallas way can be a terrifying thing, and here's why. Public speaking can be tough, but some of our speakers are bearing their soul when they tell their story. It's not just facts. We had an event just like this in Denton in August, and our first student speaker made the presentation and then ran out the door. I suppose ran all the way home, because it was a very personal story. Our second speaker for the evening did not show up. And for a while, we were that mix of frustrated of, why didn't you come? And also, oh gosh, I hope they're okay. We found out later that they were perfectly fine. It was just overwhelming. And then our third speaker was brilliant. So we had a fabulous program, but it's scary if you're bearing your soul. And I'm about to introduce somebody who's one of the bravest men I have ever met. We don't judge. We don't judge at the Dallas way. It's alternative support. And so with open hearts and open minds, I'd like to introduce you to Tom. No adverts, ladies.
Here's a disclaimer I need to read. AA's public relations policy. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. Thus, we respectfully ask that no AA speaker or indeed any AA member be identified by full name in published or broadcast reports of our meetings, including reports on new media technologies such as the internet. The assurance of anonymity is the essence essential in our effort to help other problem drinkers who may wish to share our recovery program with us. And our tradition of anonymity reminds us that AA principles come before personalities. My name is Tom, and I am an alcoholic. I grew up in a county seat close to Dallas where my dad was a doctor and my mother was a musician who played violin, viola, piano, and organ. I grew up in the Methodist church where that organ my mother played was located. Both my parents were practicing alcoholics who never found recovery. The last years of my mother's life, she mixed sodium seconal, a powerful sleeping pill, with her vodka. She suffered multiple fractures from multiple different falls in their home. A painful experience to me was going to the hospital after one of her falls, and I told I could not see her because the doctor did not want family members to see her, specifically my father. I called the attending physician and explained I was in AA and I certainly knew of my mother's alcoholism and why she was in the hospital. I walked in and saw my mother in a straitjacket, experiencing delirium tremens. Months later, my mother told me of a visit from two of my AA lady friends who had driven up to make a cold call AA visit to ask if she might be interested in AA. Her response to me was, "Your friends were very nice, but I do not think I need AA yet." In 1984, my mother died in the swimming pool from what was listed as a heart attack. My dad, in his last years, preferred 150 proof Kentucky bourbon and injectable Demerol. Being a licensed physician, he would prescribe himself from the 3 pharmacies that were located on the town square. Interestingly, the law that stopped his own prescription writing for his own drug addiction has projected many doctors into recovery in the last 35 years by order of the Texas Medical Association. He lived 2 more years on bourbon and bottles of painkillers. My parents were middle-aged when I was born. I was the classic spoiled baby brother to my 2 older siblings. My mother remarked that Dennis the Menace was obviously not based on a fictional character. As a gay teenager, I played the role of the chaste, non-drinking little goody two-shoes student. I did not drink until I was a senior in high school. partly due to peer pressure of the Methodist Youth Fellowship, and partly out of the fear that I might behave the way my parents did when they were drunk. I may have signed a temperance pledge at one time. I adapted quite well by putting that happy-go-lucky mask on during the day to hide the actions of a night in our home. But there I was in high school, my senior year, planning to attend UT Austin, and the sirens were beginning to call me to the big world out there, the bright lights of the big city. I had seen movies where cocktails were part of the scene. I attended the senior class song committee meeting. Refreshments were served. My first drinks were daiquiris. Please note that I had multiples on my first drink. My parents obviously needed to learn what social drinking was. I found the effect produced by alcohol the great elixir that cured all my social unease and fears, or so I thought. I literally dropped most of my old friends and started running around with the class drinkers. It was definitely a social lubricant along with those diet pills I stole from my dad's office. In my college years and early adult years, I was a closeted gay man who was a not so closeted alcoholic drinker. My parents' problem was that they did not drink socially, so I suggested cocktails in the evening. They thought that was an excellent idea. I visited Dallas often and drove back home in blackouts after drinking in Dallas at bars, like the Stoneleigh P on Maple, TGI Fridays, and other straight bars of the day. But it was in the spring of 1973 at the Knox Street pub that a former high school football captain I had just met asked me if I had been to any of the bars. As he looked into my eyes, I knew exactly what he meant. He took me to a string of happy hours where drinks were so very cheap for an hour, and then we moved to the next happy hour, culminating at the Bayou Landing. It was a spiritual experience. I moved to Dallas in less than 30 days. I found a job at an exclusive plant boutique. I had arrived. That fall, the owner of the business was shipped off to a mental hospital, and a new manager suggested I go to a drying out place here in Dallas. A week in bed, lots of Valium and sleeping pills. I went there and then back to work. I was fired the day after Christmas. Since drinking was a problem for me, I went to the Dallas Mental Health Association for help in understanding my homosexuality, which I thought made me drink so much. I used to blame my drinking on my being gay, and of course I had to drink to be cheap and trashy. I did participate much more readily in sexual behavior when I was really drunk. I never was arrested for driving under the influence or public intoxication until I moved to Dallas. One night upon leaving the Bayou Landing, I was driving up the tollway, and at the Wycliffe Plaza, I had thrown a bunch of coins at the coin basket and missed. I was crawling around on the pavement picking up my change when the officer walked up and arrested me. I never knew what happened to that trick who was my passenger. I was in the jail a month club as my drinking progressed to daily drunkenness. It took 3 years of increasing unmanageability until the spring of 1976. My aunt was in AA at the time, and she had a friend named Nancy here in Dallas. I remembered Nancy's name and called her one Saturday and found that my aunt was visiting her here in Dallas. We met for lunch at the Black Eyed Pea on Cedar Springs. Since I was very hungover and I am sure smelled of booze, Nancy kept pushing me to order a drink. I refused several times until she asked me, "Tommy, do you think you might have a drinking problem?" I answered in the affirmative, and she asked if I might like to attend an AA meeting with her. I said I'd love to. She called me every day until that Thursday and I said to myself, I'm going to go to one of those goddamn AA meetings and get that lady off my back. I ended up at the Preston Group, which was the largest AA group in Texas in the 1970s. It was a cross-section of Dallas, as it was and still is, located in Preston Center at Northwest Highway and Preston Road. I did not immediately sober up, as there were parts of my life that I was fearful to share in a straight meeting of AA. On the 21st day of June, I had reached rock bottom, and I concluded that I could either get sober or just kill myself. I also decided to try the gay group of AA in Dallas, get sober and find a husband at the same time. The first gay group in Dallas was the Together Group. The Together Group is formed by members of the Metropolitan Community Church who moved to Dallas and discovered that the local MCC did not have a fellowship that started in California called Alcoholics Together. Alcoholics Together was religious in origin, and though they patterned themselves after all aspects of the AA program, they were not AA. These men went to the Dallas Intergroup Association to get information about starting a gay AA meeting in Dallas. A nice lady named Frida suggested that they start an AA group and call it the Together Group. One of the members owned a little Metzger's Milk building on West 10th Street, just west of Zang and Oak Cliff. We met there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 8 p.m. For 2 years, I attended both the Preston group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Preston Center and the Together group in Oak Cliff. In 1978, that quickly changed. One night that summer at the Preston group, a man from Dallas returned from Boston, where he had attended the first AA convention in Boston over the 4th of July weekend. It was called the Boston Roundup. He returned with both the idea of a new gay AA group in Oak Lawn and a very handsome new boyfriend. It seemed to us gay boys at the Preston group a wonderful idea. So we met at Harvey's Racket Club Apartments on Huntsville between Cedar Springs and Lemon Avenue and formed the Lambda group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We quickly located space in the basement of the Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Oak Lawn and met there for several months until the church requested that we not smoke because the smoke that we generated was drawn upstairs into the area where they had choir practice. At that time, a group here in Dallas named the Alano Group had just rented the French Art Theater space behind the Orchid Shop on Oak Lawn in Cedar Springs, where the Centrum is now. That was our first clubhouse. Alano met Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. We met Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Soon we were faced with Alano wanting to move and thus having to find a place for ourselves. I would say the explosive growth of the Lambda group in the gay community reflected the experience of all Dallas gays and lesbians coming of age. We had outgrown sharing a spot, and we found a space on McKinney Avenue across from Sassy's at 4525 McKinney Avenue. The year was 1982. To this day, it is my favorite location. We could walk out the door and go to 10 different restaurants. The space was designed by a lighting designer who was responsible for all the lighting and finishes. It was pretty elegant. We were in that location until 1986 as we moved to the Executive Tower on Mockingbird Lane, where we stayed until the real estate crash of the late 80s and we were broke and didn't have much money. And then we moved into the basement of the Lucas B&B restaurant on Oak Lawn Avenue. Yes, the Lucas B&B had a basement. We were there about a year when we rented space at 2727 Oak Lawn from 1989 to 1996. In 1996, the builder's owner informed us that he needed a month-to-month rental as he was attempting to sell the property. We, of course, panicked and found a location at 2428 Butler at Maple Avenue. Here's an interesting aside. Up until that time, we were known for the cigarette smoke. The three people who were in charge of looking for the building instructed the landlord to put a deed restriction to disallow smoking, effectively making the Lambda group a non-smoking AA group. We were on Butler up until last year when we moved to 1855 West Mockingbird Lane across the street from the DFW gun range, where many of us check in on Facebook when we're actually at an AA meeting. The greatest sorrow the Lambda group has ever endured is the AIDS crisis. From the first days of the AIDS epidemic in 1981, we had members who were in the highest risk group for contracting AIDS. Those men under the influence of alcohol and drugs practicing very risky behavior. One of the first men we lost moved from New York to Dallas as a sober man to take a great new job, and since no one here had even heard of AIDS, we were shocked when he died a few days later of pneumocystis pneumonia, because the doctor here treated him for regular pneumonia. It was about that time that the first reports of death were coming out of the CDC. Very quickly, we had some members who were patients at doctors' hospitals. I remember donning masks to visit them. As the HIV epidemic expanded, we attracted new members to Alcoholics Anonymous. Those who were told to stop drinking by their doctors but could not stop by their own willpower. I really have no estimate, but I would say half of the HIV positive men that came to Lambda in the 1980s are deceased. The other half became men living with HIV and are alive today because they were able to stop drinking and doing drugs. Now for some joy. We had our first Big D roundup for GLBT in 1982 at the old Marriott at the corner of what is now the Market Center Boulevard and Interstate 35. During the 1980s, the Big D Roundup attracted more and more people every Memorial Day weekend from all over the United States. These roundups are conventions, just like the early meetings of the Lambda group, were created to help gay and lesbian and transgender men and women become comfortable in sobriety. We have speakers, workshops, drag shows, plays, and all sorts of activities that allow much fellowship and fun. The annual Big D Roundup has been held annually on Memorial Day weekend since 1982. It is one of the oldest gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender recovery conventions in the country. It is a conference with attendees from around the USA. In 2017, it will be held at the Hilton Anatole to accommodate the 400 we expect to attend. Some ask, why Lambda? Why the Big D Roundup? What is a special interest group? I know when I came out of the closet, I moved into a much bigger closet right here in Oakland, Dallas, Texas. As I attended the Preston group of AA in those early days of my sobriety, I felt the societal implications of coming out, or those that I perceived. After all, in that small town I grew up in, I lived by the Oscar Wilde description of the love that dare not speak its name. I was certainly not aware that a discussion about special interest groups had been growing on in AA since 1945. Special interest AA meetings are usually members of AA with a common interest: women's meetings, young people's meetings, men-only meetings. Earlier gay groups had to fight to be listed as gay groups, but from the early days it was understood the only requirement for membership at any AA meeting was a desire to stop drinking. If you have a desire to stop drinking, and you are welcome at any AA meeting. In those days, we chose gay group names like Live and Let Live, Lambda, etc., so that we might be more easily recognized in the city directory as the gay group. In the beginning, I felt more comfortable at a meeting where I knew I wasn't going to be any prejudice or judgment about my sexuality. At the Together group and later at the Lambda group, I did not have to hide a major portion of my life. Oh, and maybe I could find a husband too. One of the greatest tools of AA is the process of identification. As I became comfortable talking about my disease of alcoholism in a gay meeting, or hearing other GLBT people share their experience, strength, and hope, it was really just a matter of time that I could feel comfortable in the world just as I am. What does the future hold for gay recovery in Dallas? We survived the 80s. The Big D Roundup numbers peaked in the late 1980s as other cities began to have their own gay conventions that competed with Dallas. Los Angeles moved their convention to Memorial Day weekend, and in Texas we compete with the Houston, Austin, and San Antonio conventions during the year. It gets a little expensive to go to 4 AA conventions a year in Texas. I am certainly grateful for what the Lambda group did for me. It made me comfortable in my own skin. Most alcoholics lead a double life. We had the life we wanted you to see, and the life we kept hidden from everyone we could. When I was 10 years sober, I told my complete, unabridged story, just like I am told you tonight to the Preston group of AA. I will not ever forget the fear I felt and then the love I felt from the room as I told them my adventures before and after coming to AA. They laughed their asses off at times and then cried with me too. I was telling them all those things I was too ashamed to admit to any other human being in those early days of getting sober from a podium, much like what I'm doing tonight. It is the revelation of my real self that I believe is AA's greatest asset. In AA it is referred to as the language of the heart. Today, many people who sobered up at the Lambda group go to other AA groups and don't feel any challenge with being authentic human beings, wherever they are. I would say at a typical noon meeting at the Lambda group these days, we have 10 to 20% non-gay members of AA, and at the Preston group, you need 2 or 3 hands to count the gay members in attendance there. This coming Sunday, in the churches of many of us, there will be read that portion of the Gospel Matthew, which recounts the time when John the Baptist was languishing in the prison of Herod. And hearing of the works of his cousin Jesus, he sent 2 of his disciples to say to them, "Art thou he who is to come, or shall we look for another?" And Christ did as he so often did. He did not answer them directly, but he wanted John to decide for himself. And so he said to the disciples, "Go and report to John what you have heard and what you have seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the dead hear, the dead rise, the poor have the gospel preached to them." Back in that Methodist Sunday school, I was taught that the poor in this instance did not mean only the poor in the material sense, but also meant the poor in spirit, those who were burned with an inner hunger and an inner thirst. And the word gospel meant quite literally the good news. More than 40 years ago, my aunt's friend maneuvered me into AA. Tonight, if they were to ask me, "Tell me, what did you find?" I would say what I'm going to say to you. I can tell you that only I have heard and seen it. It seems the blind do see. The lame do walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead rise. And over again, in the middle of the longest day or the darkest night, the poor have the good news told to them. God grant that it may always be so.